There we go. Now I got the itinerary. So this is now my driving plan while I'm in Kuala Lumpur. And then, maybe I add whatever airport or wherever I'm coming from. What the cool thing you can do and why I love the Google Docs is then you can just copy and paste this link and so into my Malaysia itinerary. So I'll just hover over this and then insert the link. That way I have the driving maps all ready to go for every day of the trip. So you can only have like 10 driving destinations at a time. So now for every day I'm going to have, all right, here's where I'm going to drive. Here's the order of everything I'm going to see and all the things I'm going to do while I'm in Kuala Lumpur. That's how I organize and strategize and kind of create my top things. Okay, so
welcome to Real Estate to Freedom, the podcast that helps you create the active life you've always wanted through passive income investments. Now, here are your hosts, Dr. Nate and Becky Lambert.
All right, welcome to See the World on Any Budget, Day 2. Can't wait to share with you guys some additional nuggets. Tonight, we're going to talk about housing primarily, answer any questions, and talk about, some other things as well. But let's jump right in to how to find really inexpensive housing, maybe even free housing. There's a lot of ways to get free housing. So I was teasing you guys in my Facebook post and in yesterday about how I stayed 5 weeks in Hawaii for free, 3 weeks in Costa Rica for free, and a week in New Zealand for free. So how did I do this? That's the big question. So there's a website called homeexchange.com. I'm going to share my screen here. This is one of the top ways that you can do it. This is what I used to go to New Zealand. So now there's the caveat, right? Nothing comes completely for free, although actually it did for me in some cases. You need to let someone use your house, right? So let's say you're going to, if you're willing to let someone stay in your house, then you can switch houses with them. So here's some houses, for example. See, one of you guys wanted to go to Italy, right? Esther wants to go to Italy. So you could type in what city in Italy, but these are a couple houses, and you can see all the pins of houses that you could potentially go stay. I mean, look at this, a medieval house between mountains and sea. How cool is that? Oh my gosh, look at this one's right in the thick of the mountains, really close to this, to these beautiful settings. So again, you can put your house on here, and oftentimes you can do like a 3-way exchange. They have this new system where before it used to be you had to have a direct exchange, and sometimes the person that you want to stay in their house, they don't want to stay in your house, but you can do this new thing with the balloon where they can stay in your house. You can ask someone to stay there, and then you get a balloon for having someone else stay in your house, and that gives you a credit to stay in someone else's house. So it doesn't have to be a direct exchange anymore, which is awesome. And like I say, people, you just take your belongings you're really might be worried about and just stash them in a safe place. I've never had anyone disrespect my home. So I use this website to go to New Zealand and Costa Rica. Here's the cool thing, guys. Like I actually, when I went to Costa Rica and New Zealand, maybe it's just lucky, but both times the person was gonna come at a later time, or they're like, yeah, I'll do that, and then they never did. So both times it was actually totally free. So that was awesome, right? Because I'm not saying that's gonna happen for you, but both times I used the website, the person ended up never following through. They just let me stay in their house for free. So that was kind of weird. I'm like, all right, if you just want me to stay for free and never come stay in my house, I'm cool with that. That was how free in on those two. And then the other one was, I was in BYU in Provo at the time, and I had this really nice house on the bench. Actually, let me show you the house that I was living in at the time. So anyway, so I was living in this house, and then I just found a list of all the professors at BYU Hawaii, and I'm like, hey, here, let me show you the house. Had a nice backyard and a nice view. You don't have to have an amazing house though. I mean, to do this is the house that I ended up, essentially my first flip. So I got this house, and they're like, yeah, that looks awesome. And so I targeted people that I knew would probably want to come stay in Provo, Utah, right? So people who are LDS like me that want to come see their family. So I emailed every BYU Hawaii and said, hey, I just sent them pictures of my house and asked if anyone would be interested. And I got two people that were interested. One was interested in the house. And so we exchanged. I had this beautiful house on the North Shore, just like 2 blocks from the beach. It was like a 3-bedroom house with a really nice balcony that I could sit on. 5 weeks at this beautiful place. And then I had another person who was interested in swapping cars. So I let them use my van and I used their van in Hawaii. I figured between those two things, I saved myself about $14,000. It's what I would have had to pay for that long of a house and car rental, probably even more in today's money, right? So that worked out. It was like one of my whole life was spending those 5 weeks in Hawaii, and they had a great time with their family as well. So it was a win-win. So that's one really cool way to do it. Another way is, you can Airbnb your house when you go on vacation. So we lived in Fiji for a while, and let me see if I can find the house that we lived at in Fiji. Oh, here it is. Okay. So here's the house we lived at in Fiji when we moved there. We were on House Hunters International, and this house had like a little basement with a separate entrance. So we turned that into a little studio apartment, and we had renters come living with us. We had archaeologists, people. We had an archaeologist living there. We had like someone who was taking pictures from different magazines. So that was producing some income that we could use to go on trips around the island. And then while we were gone, we would rent out the top house as well. So we had 2 rentals going, and that was paying for like all of our trips while we're living in Fiji. We were just using the rental money from Fiji. I did the same thing when we lived in Sandy, Utah. It was funny. And by the way, even if you're renting right now, you'd probably want to talk to your landlord. So after living here, I moved to this in Sandy, Utah, and I'm like, all right, I talked to my landlord and I said, I'll give you a little bit of the profit. I'll share some of that with you. So I told him what I was doing, and I even gave him a little bit of the profit every time I did it. He was actually pretty excited about it. Later, he became one of my coaching clients on investing, which is kind of funny. We ended up partnering on several deals, including one that sold this week on seller financing. We would go book an Airbnb somewhere else that we wanted to go on vacation, and then we'd put our house up for rent on Airbnb. I would often cover the cost of the Airbnb where we were going to stay. So I've done that on a couple houses. That's another strategy that works well. Just out of curiosity, would you guys, not everyone's open to this, I think I was one of the early adopters of Airbnb when we started using it back in 2012, when everyone was like, oh, that's weird having people stay in your house. Now, this is the one that if you're super young in your 20s, female, may not be the right strategy. Or you just find a host who's female, and I think it's probably fine. If you look at host and it's some creepy guy, then as a female, I'd probably avoid this strategy, but you can just enter in and it's really weird, guys. Like, especially in Europe, people are just like, people just want, they're just very welcoming and they're like, hey, I want to just some, I want to meet people. I want to see who people are and get to know random people. And so you can ultimately in their house for free. I've done it in, speaking of Italy, I did it in Italy, in Naples, Italy. Just had some random person let me stay in their house, gave me a separate room. Everything worked great. He even gave me a ride to the airport. And here's another thing about that is got to hang out at the party like with all these local Italians, and a lot of them spoke English because they were kind of like, a bunch of, you know, just a bunch of people that were internationally focused. So it was a great cultural experience to be a part of the party and talk to all these people. The cool thing was this guy he gave me a tour of Dublin. We walked around together. He showed me stuff. So people are often very generous with their time and their space. It's kind of like we as Americans are a little more closed off and not as willing to just help random people. Another way to get pretty inexpensive housing, if you haven't tried a hostel, I'd say give it a go. So hostel is, an environment where often, and I think it's gotten more and more safe and more acceptable in recent days. They often have a place, security boxes where you can put your belongings, but oftentimes it's a lot of bunk beds all in one room. I did this in Australia when I went to Australia, and it was like 10 or 15 bucks a month. So I stayed in this hostel and just had a blast. Here's the cool thing about venturing out and trying something new and different like a hostel. Again, this doesn't necessarily work with kids and families necessarily, but if you're traveling on your own, I mean, one of the best parts about it is people, is you meet all these other travelers from around the world, and they want to talk about it, right? They want to hear, asking what are the best things to do here, what are the funnest things to do in this area, and they'll tell you everything that they've done. You can compare notes, and what you're going to find is that Americans don't travel very much compared to these other countries. Most of the time when I go internationally in these tour groups, it's mostly Europeans, Aussies, and Kiwis, they call them, from Australia or from New Zealand, that are in your tour groups, because we usually just kind of stay in America most of the time. So the nice thing is, like, when you connect with these Europeans and Kiwis or Aussies, they're going to tell you about all the cool places they've been, give you some great tips and ideas and strategies, and you can stay in the hostel for 20 bucks a night. It's super cheap, super affordable. All right, so next strategy, use your social network. And by the way, I go into more depth on all of these strategies in my book, See the World on Any Budget. Here's a strategy for using your social network. So for example, when I was going to New York City, this was my first time in New York City back in, I was an undergrad student and doing an internship in Washington, D.C. with Senator Orrin Hatch. And I was like, all right, we're going to New York City, but we don't have money. So we got to figure out how to do this for free. And I know that hotels in New York City are super expensive, right? If you've stayed in New York City, you know what I'm talking about. So what do? Well, I just make a Facebook post and say, hey, I'm coming to New York City. I'm gonna be here on this such and such a date. Do any of my friends live there? And are any of you guys out there? And if so, I'd love to. I'm just looking for a place to stay. Anyone open to having me come out for a night too? So you just put yourself out there, and I know that's uncomfortable for some people to do that, but for me, I scored this beautiful apartment right close to the Empire State Building. And I mean, this apartment would have, and apparently, like, everyone, all the were gone, so we had this whole place to ourselves. My first wife and I, we just did these walking tours of New York City. It was so enchanting. Then we came back to this pad really close to the Empire State Building that we just had all to ourselves. And it's because we had the guts to just ask, to say, hey, we're looking for a place. We're looking for a place to stay. And here's the thing, like, a lot of people kind of have fun hosting, right? They kind of, obviously they won't volunteer. You're not imposing on anyone. You know, I've had someone do to me is he asked me, hey, can I come stay tomorrow? I'm like, yeah, sure. They have like 8 kids, and I'm like, oh, it's gonna be a party. 16 kids running around the house, you know. But we were down with that because we're the kind of people who like to hang out and do fun things. So there's, you know, a lot of ways to do it. The couch surfing, home swapping, Airbnb swapping, using social network. So let's talk a little bit next about. So those are the ways to do the housing on a budget. Next, let's talk about finding tours and planning out your trip, because a lot of people are like, man, I do not, I got to pay extra money to pay someone to, you know, to go on like a regular tour. See, for me, I like to arrange my own tours. I like to, in fact, for me, planning the trip is one of the very best parts of the trip. Like, it's so much fun because it's kind of like a chance to envision all the fun things there are to do in the area. It's kind of like, to me, it's almost as good as actually traveling. So let me show you an example. I showed you guys how we're doing this ribbon cutting ceremony in North Carolina. So I'm using that as that's going to be a business write-off. So I'm getting a lot of my trip paid for by business, right? So that's another little tip. Get your tax write-offs when you can. Obviously, you got to be honest about it. I can't write off this entire trip, but I'm definitely going to write off the flights within America, because that is legit business travel, because I was going from Raleigh, North Carolina to host the ribbon cutting ceremony. All right, so here's what I do. First of all, my favorite website for looking at tours is Viator. They have tons of stuff going on everywhere. So I'm gonna look at Manila, because I'm going there on my way back home. It's Saturday the 16th. So this gives me an idea of what are some of the best things to do. And by the way, if you want to do it cheaper, you don't have to actually, here's a little hack, a money-saving hack. I mean, sometimes it's nice to have the guide telling you about it, but sometimes I'm kind of back and forth. Sometimes I love having a guide. Sometimes I love to just be with my wife and not have to have a guide yakking. So I'll get the itinerary from Viator. Sometimes I pay them and use it, and it's pretty inexpensive tours. But see, like this, I'm like, ooh, Hidden Valley Springs. That sounds spectacular. Manila Tagaytay. That's another one that sounds interesting. So here's where you scroll down and you look at what to expect. Okay, so again, if you want to just create your own tour and just copy the places that they do and the places they go, that's an awesome way to do it. And you can, usually they'll have it arranged in the best possible order. So this is like, all right, it tells you exactly which steps they're going to. So they're naturally going to choose the top things to do and see in a given area. Let's check out this Hidden Valley Springs Resort. That looks kind of pretty. It tells you how long it is. It kind of gives you an overview of what to expect. And then here it looks like this one just goes straight to Hidden Valley Springs. So, God, especially if you're in a group with your family, you're not going to want to pay $160 a person. So that's especially when I go to with the family, I'll just kind of like see what the itineraries are, where they're going. And obviously this one had a little bit more of an intense, tells me all the specific places that I want to go check out while I'm in the Philippines, right? So instead of, paying these people, I'll just rent a car, or in my case, two cars, and I'll just go and we'll go to all these places. And then it's free. That's Viator is and it gives you a lot of ideas, right? It's just, oh, well, what else is there going on in this area? Oh, cool. You can do a food tour, bamboo bicycle eco tour. That sounds fun, right? So you can just see like what are the kind of fun experiences you can have, because there's one thing to go to the sites, but sometimes you might want to go on a snorkeling adventure or ATVs. Oh man, that looks really fun. Okay, ATVs in the jungle. So, it just gives you tons of ideas of what you can do and see in an area. Now, I had mentioned things to do so you can get it from Viator, or my favorite thing is TripAdvisor. And if you remember, don't click on the sponsored link. Actually, let's click on the sponsored link, because this does have kind of like a lot of these are going to be connected to Viator. So these are more like excursions that you're going to pay for. And I think Viator and TripAdvisor work together. But you're going to want to scroll down to the organic website, the sponsored one. And in this case, I showed you guys how they have the rankings, and you can see the numbers. Okay, I usually look at the first two pages, see what things interest me the most, and people vote with their feet and with their reviews. The ones that have the most reviews are usually the best. Okay, so here are my lists. These are my list of things that, let's say, in Kuala Lumpur, I'm most interested in going and doing and seeing. There's this Batu Cave. So what I do, and it's ideal if you do have two screens on your computer. So what I do is I just go to Google Maps, and I start, I just kind of go back and forth, and it doesn't take that long. You just hurry and copy and paste. And the reason I do this is because, again, if you're going with a tour guide, they'll probably take you on the best route. But if you're just trying to really conquer the sites in a city, for example, you could go to Viator and just kind of see where they go. Or you can just go to TripAdvisor and copy and paste and create your own tour, your own sequence of events. So I'm just pick these out, went through the list, and now I'm just, I guess that one didn't work. Okay. And now I'm like, oh, Pingyang Upper Hill Station. That one I'm probably not going to go check out. Maybe that was a mistake. Okay. So the reason you do this is because you want to do it in a smart way. I must have been looking at the entire country, but this gives you at least some idea. All right, so let's just say these are my top destinations, and then maybe I'll add, let's say, the Kuala Lumpur National Airport. Here it is. Okay, International Airport. Looks like it's pretty far south, pretty far out of the city. So that's helpful to know, right? It's helpful to know all these things. And then you're going to arrange it in the order so you can shift things on the map. And I might be behind technology. I imagine that they probably even have something where you can just click and have everything magically line up. But I'm gonna kind of eyeball this out, and I see how. All right, the Central Market and what's this other thing? These are like right next to each other. So I'm gonna naturally pair these together. It looks like they're already paired together. And then I'm gonna go in the most efficient way possible. So naturally, I'm gonna wanna also pair the Batu Caves, the Jalen Arbor. So I'm going to decide, all right, let's start in the Central Market, and then, we're going to do the temple. So I'm going to rearrange it, and you can see the drive times going down as you rearrange things to be in a more efficient manner. See, now I got it down to 55, and I have something that's messed up, because I guess you get the point though, right? So there we go. Now I got the itinerary. So this is now my driving plan while I'm in Kuala Lumpur. And then, maybe I add whatever airport or wherever I'm coming from. What the cool thing you can do, and why I love the Google Docs, is then you can just copy and paste this link, and so into my Malaysia itinerary. So I'll just hover over this and then insert the link. That way I have the driving maps all ready to go for every day of the trip, because you can only have like 10 driving destinations at a time. So now for every day, I'm going to have, all right, here's where I'm going to drive. Here's the order of everything I'm going to see and all the things I'm going to do while I'm in Kuala Lumpur. That's how I organize and strategize and kind of create my top things. Okay, so here's another way that I plan these epic trips, because like I say, last summer we were in Eastern Europe for 5 weeks. We stayed in 20 different places. So you want to get a rough idea of how long you're going to go, what are the things to see in an area, and then ideally, let's just say, I like what I call it the hub strategy. This is like maybe, and if you're a vacationer, you're just going to hang out at the resort and sit at the beach, maybe that's who you are. But if you're like me and you want to go and see everything you possibly can, be an adventurer, then listen up to this. So I like to have a home base. So let's just say I'm going to go to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and I'm looking at Viator, right? I'm checking out what are some of let's go back to the Philippines. I'm looking at some strategies in the Philippines, places that I want to go. I'm looking at Viator to see what are some day trips from Manila. So maybe I'm like headquartered in Manila for like 3 or 4 days, and I'm going to go do a day trip to the west and has some cool cruise or snorkeling. I'm going to see the beaches. And then day 2, I'm going to go to the east and I'm going to see the mountains. I'm going to travel around and see that part 3 or 4 hours east of Manila. So then, but my headquarters, my hub is Manila, right? And so I'm kind of checking out those things in that region. I'm seeing how many days make sense for me to stay there by doing research on, Viator and on TripAdvisor, in terms of, so that gives me an idea of how long I want to stay at each place. And then let's just say I'm in the Philippines. I'm like, I've heard such great things about this other island, right? So then I go and look up that other island, and maybe I take an intra-country flight to that other island, and I make that my next hub for the next 2 or 3 days. The cool thing about that, about having a hub, is that you don't have to switch hotels every night. You can stay in one place that's kind of central. I did this in Greece, right? I had a hub in Athens. We kind of searched everything in the Athens area. Then I went to the Peloponnese on the west. I kind of searched all those, we explored that region while we're in Greece. And then we had 2 different islands that were, the places like our hub island, that we went and explored those islands in depth. So that's a really great way, because it gives you a chance to really explore each particular area in a lot of depth. So that's a really great way to do it with the hub strategy. So then the next thing I wanted to share is in terms of the order, like how do you plan one of these epic trips? So first of all, like I said, figure out, I can get off work for 10 days. All right. Explore all the different hubs that you want to go to. In Greece, for me, I found, okay, there's I stayed in Greece for like 3 weeks. But whatever you can manage. All right, so let's say you got 3 different hubs. You're going to stay in each hub for 3 days. So you might want to you got to decide, is it drivable to go between the hubs? Sometimes it's drivable. In Nepal, it wasn't drivable, so I just flew. We just flew from one hub to the next. We had 3 different hub cities that we went to in Nepal, and we just actually, the plan was to fly, but we ended up having to drive because there was so much pollution that we couldn't end up flying like we wanted. But that was the plan, right? So decide if you're gonna fly or drive, and you'll be surprised that intra-country flights outside of the United States are way cheaper than they are here, oftentimes 30-60 bucks. And if it's super far, I mean, it just makes a lot of sense to just fly from one hub to the next. So figure out kind of like your general itinerary, how long you're going to be. Then the last step is, well, then I book the flights, right? I make sure I got the flights that I wanted. I've kind of planned out, I found the Los Angeles for for Eastern Asia, and for the Polynesia and Southeast, Australia. And then you got JFK's for Europe and Africa, and you've got Miami that really gets you to everywhere in Central and South America and the Caribbean. Those are the 3 hub cities. So make sure you got your flights locked in, get those flights locked in, and then you go ahead and book those flights, and then I'd go ahead and as long as you kind of know about what you're going to do and how long you're going to stay, then that's when you book your hotels or Airbnbs at the end. Because now all right, I'm going to be here 3 days, I'm going to be here 2 days, I'm going to be here 4 days. So then you can go find the coolest places that you can find. I usually use Airbnb because you get some of the most unique places through Airbnb. I stayed in Greece, we stayed in a cliff in Ia. So, I stayed in an ancient castle. Like in Poland, we stayed in a house. Guys, I'm not kidding. This was from the 1400s. This Polish palace in the middle of nowhere. Okay, and it was like a few $100s to stay in this house. I'm not joking. It was like 30,000 square feet. It was like 5 stories. The top 3 stories were like ruins. Can't believe they let us go up there. It was pretty awesome. But so find those fun, unique places, and ideally like on Airbnb. I usually check hotels.com. They give me a chance to get, I just booked a ton of places for free because like hotels.com, every time you book through them, they give you a little credit that you can then use to get free places later on. I know a lot of places have that. A lot of you guys might have Marriott rewards, so a lot of those can be good as well. So those are some of my favorite. Edmund, if you want, I'm gonna make you a co-host, bro. So Edmund's done a fair bit of travel as well. Edmund, you want to tell him about the trip you took? You went on a private yacht.
Obviously I wouldn't have been able to do 90% of what I've been doing over the last several years if I didn't link up with you and learn the ways of, real estate and all that good stuff. So I was able to basically plan out a couple months, and my wife and I and our 2 kids, we rented a catamaran, private catamaran, chef, private captain, and they took us around the US and British Virgin Islands. So that was about a 6-day, 5-night trip in the middle of 2 hurricanes, right? We thought we were going to have to get it canceled. But we used our reward points to be able to, one, obviously fly. And then what I decided to do was, because I had an idea that my wife wanted to go on this trip at that time, I planned about 6 months out, and then I picked a flip. I found a house that I knew I was going to profit. I mean, the whole trip was 15,000 minus points and stuff that included the points with the airplane and everything else. So I just found a flip and decided that I was going to flip this home to take my wife and my kids on their dream vacation, which was, a private catamaran around the US and British Virgin Islands. We've done island hopping. We've been all around the Caribbean. We've never been like on a catamaran or anything like that. So it was a really cool trip and experience, especially for the kids. So yeah, I mean, I know some of you guys are involved in real estate. I know some aren't, but it was in joining Nate's coaching group that allowed me to kind of figure all this out. Then I became friends with the man. And then he really taught me, like, what credit cards to use and all that good stuff to get the extra points. So I've never seen somebody travel so much on such a, I don't want to call it a budget, but just like he just organizes everything. He's got all kinds of different hacks, is probably the best way to call it, that can get you guys to see so many locations.
Thanks for listening to Real Estate to Freedom with Dr. Nate and Becky Lambert. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can download their free ebooks and workshops by visiting realestatetoFreedom.com.